All right, I'm gonna switch over to the live scene, and you guys will be on camera on stream.
All right.
All right.
Bam! There we go. There we are. All right, we are live. Um, with some Candy Crush and the Carriers. CC. Dang it. All right, so I'm gonna start the stream off like I always do, and tell you guys that the reason why I'm doing these mental health awareness streams, this is Mental Health Awareness Month, and the statistics are 1 in every 5 people struggle or suffer with some form of mental illness, mental struggle, challenge, issue, however you want to word it. And I am 1 in 5. And I kept quiet for 10 years and tried to do this myself, not knowing that it was okay to speak up for myself and ask for help because my pride got in the way. I'm very stubborn. I have a strong character and personality, and I thought I could do it myself, and I can't. And so I started speaking to my friends, my best friends, and they identified with some of the things that I was going through. That was a pivotal moment for me. That was a turning point, and it opened my eyes and made me realize that I need to speak more. And the more I talked about it, the better life got. Oh my goodness. And it made me realize that I was not alone. And so I fight for that for other people. I fight to share that light that you're not alone. You're never alone. And there's other areas I can go with that as well. But you're not alone. So any proceeds, if you donate through the Cash App or PayPal during these live streams, I get nothing from doing these, nothing at all. It's my pleasure, my honor, my passion to talk about mental health awareness because it's critical at this point in what our world is going through. And your proceeds will go to the NAMI, which is National Alliance of Mental Illness. And I just found out this week there is one right down the road from my house. I did not know that. It's on Story Road. I didn't know. Oh my goodness. But 100% of your Cash App and PayPal donations go to the NAMI. And I did sign a pledge to have no stigma. And we got to stop the stigma about this. So I have hand selected a handful of people to do interviews with me tonight to speak out because we all have different experiences. We all think differently. We all have, we just encountered so many different things. But on the flip side, a lot of people can identify with our stories. And my 2 guests today is a married couple. Gosh, how long's it been? 5 years, or I don't even know.
I think we've known each other about 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About 5 years.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, maybe 6.
Oh, I lost count. It's been a while.
Right.
I've seen their struggles. I've heard their prayers. I've just, I'm not going to say anything. That's their story. That's why they're here, to tell their story. They've got a story to tell, and it's not just their story. My hopes and prayers is that it brings some light into your life and just kind of opens your eyes. And if you are struggling with similar issues, I'm looking forward to the victory story. And we don't get the honor and praise and glory in the victory story. We didn't do it ourselves. So I'll take a breath, stop talking, and let our special guests introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about themselves and their titles and what they do.
All right. Well, I'll jump in. Bryan Carrier, and I'm a high school teacher and also a youth director at Oakland Baptist Church, which is where I met Becca. And I've been teaching now for over 10 years, just completed my 10th year actually. And been doing youth ministry for about the same, about 8 to 9 years. Been in Oakland, I think 5 or 6 years, which is what we were kind of guessing with
Right.
earlier too. And yeah, so I guess that kind of introduces who I am and what I do. And so.
Right. And I'm Michelle Carrier, and I am the music director at Oakland Baptist Church. So I've been doing that for, I think, 3 years now, maybe 3.5, that I've been working there on staff, and of course, helping him with youth ministry on the side. So we have a lot of fun with that. But it's definitely a blessing to be able to it's a great church, and we just love the people there, and it's a blessing to be able to serve the Lord in that way. So we are thankful for that.
Sorry, I had to mute my mic so you wouldn't hear. If you hear weird noises, it's people interacting with the stream.
Oh, that's fine.
It's okay.
That's not going to distract us.
Okay.
Again, we do youth ministry, so you know how that goes.
True.
You just keep on going.
All
No
right.
distraction.
Well, I know that your story isn't necessarily about or specifically about mental health issues, but what I have learned through my personal life is, we go through stuff and it does impact us, and where your mind is, your body follows, and the struggle is real on that end. And I can't imagine what you guys, I can't imagine. And that's why I asked you to come and talk about it. Like, will you please tell us your story?
Okay. Well, we have been married for 10 years. In February, we celebrated our 10-year anniversary. We met in college, and when we'd been married for, I guess it was about 1.5 years, we decided we wanted to start trying to have children. And for whatever reason, we just weren't able to. So we've been trying. It's been about 8 years that we've been trying to have a baby. And I am pregnant now. So that's exciting news. We're very excited about that. But it was a long 8 years leading up to that. So I guess where to start? Well, like I said, we went through about 8 years. I did go to the doctor, and the most that I got from the doctor is, well, there's no reason that we can find why you shouldn't be able to get pregnant. So we didn't really get any answers from that. That you would think that would be helpful, because you're like, oh, okay, well, I should be able to get pregnant. But then it was like, well, I'm not getting pregnant, so I don't know what's going on with that. So we didn't really get any answers from the medical side of things. And time just kind of kept going and going. We did get pregnant one other time. It was about 5 years ago, but we had a miscarriage early on. And so that was we struggled a lot with that. I think for me, that was the low point, because it was like, okay, I thought we were good and we were in the clear, and then all of a sudden we weren't. And I remember talking to a friend afterwards, and she had had a miscarriage before as well, and she said, well, you'll get pregnant again. It's going to happen again. And I remember saying, well, what if it takes another 3 years? Because it was already hard enough to go through 3 years. Then it took 5 years, so it took even longer than that. Infertility is kind of a difficult thing to explain if you haven't gone through it, because it's not really a tangible loss, because it's a loss of something that you haven't had yet. And so there were a lot of times when I would feel like, okay, I'm just being ridiculous for being upset about this, because of course, I still have time and it'll probably happen. And and then there were other times when I would just be like, okay, I don't know if I'm ever going to have a baby, and dealing with all of that. The other thing about infertility is that you get a constant reminder of the fact that you are struggling with that, because it's just a cyclical thing that comes up every month to remind you that, oh yeah, you're not pregnant, you're not having a baby right now. And so in a way, it was almost like we were grieving every month. We kind of start that process again, if that makes sense. So it's kind of hard. And there were times when I would feel like, kind of okay with it. Like, well, I'm not super upset. And then there were a lot of times when I just would cry myself to sleep because I was like, I don't know what's happening right now. So it has been, again, it's been 8 years, which, looking back, again, it's one of those things that if you haven't experienced infertility, then you might be like, well, that's not that bad. I mean, you just had to wait a little bit. But I mean, we struggle with a lot of different things, and a lot of people saying comments that they were trying to be helpful, but they didn't know our situation. And so things ended up being hurtful, a lot of questions as to why we didn't have children. I think a lot of people assumed that we didn't have kids because we were kind of being immature and we were just having fun and doing our own thing, which wasn't the case. We do like to have fun. I mean, we're in youth ministry, so we're all about that. But we have wanted to have kids, again, this whole time. And so we've been kind of struggling with that. So do you want to share more?
Yeah, well, just some of the thoughts listeners share. That part of the story is with it being kind of a monthly reminder of not having that, it's really a struggle with control, of not having control of that. I know that's one of the things I really struggle with, is not having control of the timing. And obviously coming from our perspective and everything, we knew it was going to be God's timing, but we would, I guess, every month it would kind of be, okay, we're excited. God's got me still excited about the potential of having a kid. Oh, it could be possibly this month. Oh, and then there's the reminder. And so that was kind of like a monthly cycle of emotions. And I mean, with this being mental awareness month, I mean, this is, it was definitely a mental struggle. I mean, there was times where, Becca had mentioned that it's not just a mental thing, it affects your body. I mean, there were times where, it affected me to the point where I didn't even want to get out of bed some days. And so infertility is definitely something that impacts you mentally. And like Michelle said, it's hard to explain unless you've experienced that. And so I guess that's kind of my perspective on it from that part of the story too, with the struggle being cyclical, because it really is. It's one of those unique situations where it's not you're just waiting 8 years and then boom, there it is. It could be this month, just kidding. It could be this month, just kidding. Or even with the miscarriage, that was really hard because it was, answered prayer and then just kidding. And so that was really hard. I think we carried that one to about 10, 11 weeks until we had that miscarriage.
Yeah.
And so we're at 20, 21, almost 22 weeks now. And so
tomorrow is 22.
Tomorrow's 22 weeks. And so I just say that because it's just kind of, like she said, it's a unique struggle because of the cyclical nature of it. Something that you have to continuously battle through. I don't know.
I remember people saying to me, well, if you just stop trying, then it'll happen. And I remember being like, I don't really know how I'm supposed to stop trying. Like I'm still thinking about it. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying not to stress about it, and I'm not trying to, change my whole life to make it happen because I know that I can't make it happen. But there's no way that I could just stop dreaming about having a kid. I mean, sometimes I would literally dream about having a baby, and then I'd wake up and be like, really? Why would I have that? So it wasn't something that I could just let go of that easily. So for me, I had to figure out different ways that I could process through that and deal with it. And I realized, I learned a lot through it. It's hard to even express how much I learned. But God really used it to improve my prayer life, and he used it to improve our community, because like at first when we were struggling, we really didn't tell anybody. So there were a lot of people who just assumed we weren't even thinking about having kids at the time. And then we started telling people. I struggled with it at first because everybody that is really close to us has children. And so I was like, they're not going to understand. They're not going to know what we're talking about. And so I struggled with that. But I realized, actually through youth ministry, that we talk to a lot of teenagers, and I may not have gone through exactly what they're going through, but that doesn't mean that I can't support them through it and pray for them through it. And so God really used that in my life to be like, hey, just because they haven't been there doesn't mean they can't be there for you. And so he helped me to slowly open up to people. And actually, Becca is one of the first people that I started really opening up to, because we would call once a week and just pray together. And that was one of the things that was always on the list. And so she knows a lot of that struggle and just the ups and downs of that. And so that was one thing that God really taught me through this. And so if you're struggling, I mean, whatever you're struggling with, people don't have to know exactly what you've gone through. They don't have to have been there, because the truth is nobody's story is exactly the same anyway. So nobody has completely been there. Even the two of us, like, we went through the same thing, but we dealt with it differently. And so no one's going to completely understand where you're coming from, but that doesn't mean that you can't talk to somebody about it, somebody who you trust. And, you know, maybe some of the advice they give isn't going to be helpful, but that doesn't mean that they don't mean well and that they're not trying to support you through it. And so that's one thing that God really taught me through it, is just being willing to be vulnerable and opening up and sharing what I'm struggling with. And I learned that it really helped a lot of other people, even though they weren't struggling with the same thing, to feel like, oh, okay, well, she's struggling too, and I can talk to her about this situation. And so it helped build our community a lot. And now, of course, there's a lot of community celebration going on, because we've had a lot of people who have been praying with us for years. And so it's just exciting to see all the different people who are like super excited. All of us. So
Yeah, and that, I mean, it really addresses the stigma that we're talking about, even with the mental health, which again, I struggled pretty heavily with that through this time. Is until you open up with somebody, you don't realize what other people are struggling with as well. And you actually find out that two people can be struggling, but because you're struggling with different issues, I can help you with your struggle and you can help me with my struggle. And so you see a lot of, I guess the fancy word for that is symbiotic empathy. If you want some fancy college words there for you, because you're able to help each other out with issues that you haven't actually experienced. And so we experienced a lot of that. She probably did a better job at that, and we can have gender discussions on that, I'm sure, than I did as far as reaching out to other people.
you felt better.
I did. It's true. But the cool thing about that is when you open up with somebody else, then they're more willing to open up as well, and you end up solving two problems because of one issue, because somebody was bold enough to be vulnerable, like she said. And so I would highly encourage anyone listening to this to, if you're struggling with something, please reach out to somebody, because I guarantee you somebody that you're reaching out to has or is struggling with something as well, and they can help you, even though they may not be going through or have gone through whatever specific struggle you have. And with that said, I'll tell you, when we reached out because of the infertility, there were a number of people who shared, yeah, we experienced a miscarriage, or we've had 6, or we've experienced this many miscarriages in the past as well. And so you find out things about people that you didn't know that they'd actually gone through your same struggle. And for whatever reason, in my opinion, God has put them in your path so that they can help you with that. So
True. I think one of the other big things that I learned, because, you know, we are Christians, and so we, of course, our main source of strength and peace is Jesus Christ, and that's what we believe. But I think sometimes we feel like we have to have everything together before we approach God, which really doesn't make sense when you think about it. But sometimes we feel like we have to go to God with ourselves already put together and kind of put on like a front for God. And so I found myself a lot of times in prayer, I would go to God and say, okay, well, I know you have this under control and I believe you and, I trust you. And, it's not that I didn't believe those things, but at first, a lot of times when I would go to God, I wouldn't come to him with the real struggle that I was going through and with all of that anxiety and the fear and the pain and the depression, because I felt like, well, I should come to God with reverence. And yeah, I mean, we should come to God with reverence. That is true. But the truth is that God knows exactly what we're feeling anyway. So when we come to him, it's okay to come to him with questions, and it's okay to come to him even with anger and being like, God, why are you doing this? I don't understand what you're doing, because he already knows that we're thinking it anyway. And when we're able to come to God honestly, then he's able to meet us there and say, okay, now that you're being honest with me, we can work on that. Because God wants to change us and transform us. But if we're coming to him pretending like we have everything together, then we're pretending like we don't really need him to transform us, honestly. And so we're not trusting him to change our hearts. So I found that when I came to him and said, God, I'm just really feeling anxious about this. And I mean, I don't know if I'm ever going to have a baby, and I don't know how to trust that eventually over time, when I was willing to be honest with him, then he was able to change my heart and give me peace in the middle of all of those questions, and in the middle of the uncertainty. He was able to give me the ability to say and actually mean, okay, God, I do trust you in this. And so there were times when I struggled with that. And again, not that I doubted that God was able to give us a child ever, but there were definitely times when I doubted that he was going to. And but being willing to come to him and bring that to him honestly really gave it, it allowed me to allow him to actually change my heart. So I learned a lot about coming to him with brokenness, because we don't have to have it all together to come to him. In fact, he wants us to come to him honestly and sincerely so that he can pick up those pieces and put it together in the way that he wants it to be put together anyway. And so that's really how spiritual formation happens, because we're willing to be honest with God and say, all right, Lord, I know this is a sinful attitude for me to have, but this is what I'm feeling right now. Like when I would struggle with jealousy because somebody else had a baby, we're like, all right, I know I'm not supposed to be jealous. I'm supposed to be happy for them, but I don't feel happy for them right now. But when I came to him with that, then he was able to give me that peace and give me joy so that I really could actually be happy for them. And so that's what God does when we're struggling with something. If we're willing to come to him and be honest about it and say, all right, I know that this isn't where I need to be, but I need your help because I can't fix it myself.
And she's probably going to be mad at me for stealing her thunder on this one, but I kind of learned this one from her anyways, and she'll give you the verse reference, but God given us the desire of our hearts.
Psalm 37:4.
So Psalm 37:4 talks about in our prayer lives that we pray and ask God to kind of give us the desires of his heart, that our desires would be aligned with his desires. And that was kind of a struggle for me because God never took that desire for a child away. The idea of abortion, which for some people, or not abortion, sorry, adoption. That's a different story with the,
yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead, since Freudian slip there. The abortion thing, one of the big struggles for me, ministry-wise, is I actually had to counsel a teenager who had gone through an abortion. the week after we had our miscarriage. So that's why that Freudian slip is coming out. It's probably one of the hardest ministry things that I had to do through this time. And the teenager had known we had gone through the miscarriage as well, and it was really hard for her to come to us. But you talk about the power of the Holy Spirit teaching through you at your weakest point in ministry, and he definitely did that. So what I meant to say on my story was adoption, but the idea of adoption it never latched onto me for some reason. And those who struggle with infertility because they absolutely can't have children, adoption is a great option. But through this verse, asking God to give us the desires of our heart, adoption really never came up in my mind, and so that's just not a route that we took. My family is full of nurses, and so a lot of them were like giving us all these different medical things and techniques that we should have been looking into, which again kind of goes back to the control issue, us trying to be in control of what God's timing is going to be. And none of those techniques or medical procedures, if you will, really came to our mind to even attempt to do, and we didn't. We didn't use any sort of fertility drugs or procedures or whatever new age stuff is out there. I mean, I don't know, because we didn't research it, because God did not prompt that as a desire for us to do. And so, and the reason I share that is because each story, like we're talking tonight, is going to be different. And so you need to know, just because this is our story, that 8 years later, struggling with infertility, God bless us with a child, that may not necessarily be your story. And you need to know that those options are out there. They're awesome options. Adoption, I know several people who have adopted, and it's been a blessing and it's amazing. And so that could be an option for some out there who are struggling. We know friends who struggle, and they absolutely cannot have children according to medical doctors. Now, could God perform a miracle? Of course. But there are other options out there. So with all that rambling said, Psalm 37:4, right?
Yeah, it says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And it goes on, the next verse says, commit your way to him, trust in him, and he will act. And so, it means that first, making sure that we're in the right place with God, that we're committing our way to him, that we're delighting in him. But then, like he said, just saying, all right, Lord, if this isn't in your will, then give us a different desire that is in your will. And that he really never changed that desire for either of us. So
we never even discussed adoption as a couple. That topic never even came up. So.
No, we really didn't. So, and I think for me, I had been praying for a long time. We went to Move Conference, which is a youth conference that happens in December. And this past December, we went to Move Conference, and one of the speakers was talking about how God had challenged him the year before to say, all right, what are you believing in prayer that I'm going to accomplish in this year? And so I heard that, and I remember, kind of feeling challenged by that. And I had thought, well, I don't know, because I've always felt weird about putting God on a timetable, but at the same time, I know that God definitely had that speaker there for a reason. And so what I started praying for this year was, all right, Lord, I'm just praying that by the end of this year that we have some kind of answer, whether that be a baby or a different direction that you want us to go, or just a peace to know that it's going to happen, just a lifting of the anxiety and the depression and all of that we've been cycling through. And so that's really what I started praying for 2020, was just some kind of peace, or, whether that be a baby or some direction or whatever it would be, that we would get some kind of answer for this. And it was like the last week in January, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So God answered that within a month. He was like, okay, well, here you go. Which is really surprising, because I wasn't actually expecting an answer that soon, which I guess part of me should have been because again, we've been praying for it, but it's hard when you've been praying for something for so long to really expect it to happen right away, if that makes sense. At least, I don't know. It was a struggle, but yeah, God really answered that like right up front. So that was definitely how he chose to do it. And, you know, so far everything is going well. It's been a healthy pregnancy and we're having a girl. So we're very excited and due in September. So, no.
What's her name?
Abigail Faith.
Which, since she said the name, I get to say the reason. Abigail means bringer of joy or her father's joy. So, faith, of course, for the 8 years of faith.
Lots of faith.
Lots of faith.
So.
Nice. One thing that y'all said that I kept rehearsing in my brain over and over and over through the multiple conversations that Michelle and I have had in the past. One thing that just warriors of faith is what I think of when I think of y'all. I don't know the deep struggles. I can't imagine or fathom what y'all have gone through, but I know Michelle never gave up. I mean, I'm sure you haven't either, Bryan, but just I talked with Michelle, and
right, of course,
she would say that y'all even said it, I think, in this stream, if not on the one in Oakland, that, if this is not meant to be, Lord, please remove this desire from us. And he never did, y'all had said. And not only that, but, you mentioned you got family in the medical field, and they're like, well, you can try this way, you can try this. And I remember Michelle specifically stated that, we want God to make a way so God can get the glory. I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
When I saw your post that y'all are pregnant, I literally cried because I remember the struggles and seeing y'all go through it, and that was just on the surface level.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you mentioned God getting the glory. That was one of my bargaining chips. That's one of the stages. I was like, look, God, if you give us a child, I promise I'm going to tell the story, which I am. But, through those times of struggle, you go through those stages of grief, if you will, or depression, whatever you want to call them. They're real. And that was definitely a bargaining stage for me, was even, hey, God, I promise I'm giving you the glory. I'm going to give it to you. Just give us the child.
True. But, we know that this definitely is an answered prayer, and it's not something that we could make happen. Well, one of the big things for me, because I did research and there's a lot of different opinions out there on things you could do to try to get pregnant. And one of the big things for me was, I don't want to turn our lives upside down for something that, number one, may or may not happen, because a lot of people are trying a lot of different things, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But number two, it's something that really ultimately is in God's control, because God creates life. And so it was important to me that our marriage was not turned upside down in the hopes of trying to make something happen that we don't actually have control over.
And you mentioned, you call us warriors of faith, which, God gets the glory for that because he's the source of faith. But it's definitely all the warriors of faith around us. And those have been the real cool stories too. Like, we tell people, we're pregnant, we make that announcement, and they're like, finally, that's been on my prayer list for 5 or 6 years, because that's how long they've known us. And so they get to share in that celebration too, which is very important as the Christian body, is that spiritual discipline of celebration. And I think we miss that or water it down sometimes, because we forget to celebrate the good times with each other as well. And so there's so many people of warriors of faith, I like that term, warriors of faith, who have prayed alongside of us over the many years of waiting, and they get to have a little bit of faith brought upon them as well. And that's what really excites me too about this. And I'm glad we're able to do this with you as well. So we're honored, Becca, for you allowing us to be on here and share our story, because again, we can celebrate all those people who pray alongside of us, and they get to celebrate too. So something to celebrate.
It's true. And the thing is, if you don't share what you're struggling with, then even when God does bring you through it, then people don't really know, or it doesn't have as big of an impact on them because they didn't really see the struggle to begin with. And so sometimes we lose that in the body of Christ because we're not willing to open up and share what we're struggling with. So then when God does bring us through it, people don't realize how much of a victory it really is. And so it's important for us to be able to be willing to share and to be willing to pray for each other, and then to be willing to celebrate with each other.
Oh yeah, goodness. I couldn't have said any of that any better. Oh my gosh. So you had mentioned earlier too that people would just say things, not going out of their way, but y'all were sensitive to stuff because you know your struggles. And I've even heard it myself. People ask y'all, well, don't y'all want to have a family or something? I'm sure a million things run through your head, and in that moment all you can do is just smile and nod.
Yeah.
But
go ahead, sorry.
One extreme where people just kind of say stuff without thinking really, and then on the other hand you got people just pouring into your life and celebrating, like you were saying, because they know your struggles. And it's one extreme to the other. And Bryan emphasized the importance of talking to people, sharing with people, because y'all found out things about other people because of conversation.
Yeah.
To realize that, oh, I didn't know y'all were going through that, or maybe somebody went through it and gave you words of affirmation and encouragement, or I don't know. It's just as simple as speak out, talk. We weren't meant to do life alone, period.
Right.
And you don't have
it's
to
true.
be married.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes, like I said, sometimes people are going to say things that are not helpful. And sometimes,
especially if you work in a high school.
Oh.
Students have no filters.
Right. And sometimes people it's because they don't know the situation. Sometimes it's because they mean well, but they don't really understand, but we had to learn to kind of let those things go and say, okay, well, they were trying to be helpful and encouraging, even though they didn't get it right. So, but yeah, sometimes people said some things that were, not helpful. I remember standing in line I think I was at a grocery store, and just talking to the person in line, and she was asking me, if I was married, and I think we'd been married about 8 years at that point. She asked me if I had children, and I said, well, no, we don't have kids yet. And I remember her saying that I was a terrible daughter for not giving my mom grandchildren. And I was like, well, I don't really know what to say to you right now.
Oh my
because,
God.
again, and there's somebody I don't even know her. I didn't even know her name. So sometimes people are going to say things, but you got to learn to just let that go and be like, okay, well, we're just trusting God for that. And,
obviously she was going through something too. Good grief.
Yeah. Well, and you never know what people are going to say.
Truth.
Most of the time, people were trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
I will say that. Most of the time, people were trying to be helpful. And maybe they just didn't quite understand what we were going through. And so it didn't come off right or whatever. But most of the time, I was able to be like, okay, well, I know your heart is in the right place. Occasionally, people would say something, and I was just like, why would you even say that? But you just got to learn to let those things go and say, all right, well, that's just, one person, and they don't really know what they're talking about, so it's okay.
Yeah, it'd be like that, yo.
And it's a good life skill to be able to filter out the things that aren't going to build you up. So that's from the enemy. That goes over here. Yep. The encouraging things are from God. Okay, I'm going to take those. Thank you. But that's a really important skill when you're struggling with any issue. It's not easy.
No.
But it's a good skill to be able to decipher the junk from the encouragement.
Yeah.
I really appreciate y'all's willingness and your thoughts and energy, emotion, everything. I appreciate your lives right now because this has been. I'm just grateful that y'all are willing. Thank y'all so much for being here and doing this.
Yeah.
Y'all have anything that y'all would like to add before we close?
I do have something I want to throw out. I always got like some last minute thing I got thrown in for this trigger. And it was actually the word trigger, because I was thinking about with my high school students, they would mean well and they'd be like, so Mr. Carey, you got kids of your own? I'd be like, no, I don't. And they'd be like, why not? And then I'm triggered at that point and I'd be like, well, you have to ask God. And those would be some of my bad days, I think it's important for us to understand, everyone to understand that you don't know what people are going through. And so, I would have to go back to that student and be like, I'm sorry, I came at you pretty hard on that one, but it's a sensitive subject. But we need to realize that a lot of people have sensitive subjects and there are triggers. I mean, when you delve into some of the deep mental struggles that are related to traumatic events, I'm in Stephen Littleton's area right now, but with the psychology of it. But there are legitimate trigger words and trigger phrases that are just going to have people lash out on you. And so you've got to be careful not to take those personal. You just got to be careful when we're interacting with people. You don't know what people are going through. And it should be about encouragement, not about tearing people down. And so that was just something else that I needed to get out. But this has been good. And I hope it's helpful for others, and we're just glad that we're able to celebrate God's story through our lives and the blessings that He's given us.
Sure.
So.
All right, I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much. I want to read you a comment. I had one viewer saying that I don't remember exactly what we're talking about. She said her name is Karen. That's super tough for sure. I had 2 miscarriages between my kids. Then my son almost didn't make it through birth. And she was identifying left and right with you guys.
Yeah.
She laughed, tears of joy laughing. Men and women definitely handle it differently.
Yeah. That was probably the part where I was like, I didn't reach out to nobody.
And then she asked, what day in September?
25th.
25th. All right. Did you get that, Stacy? I mean, Karen. Alrighty.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it was probably the part we were sharing where, a lot of people have gone through stuff that you don't realize until you broach the subject. And I mean, that's really, I think it's really the main focus of this month is to understand that if you're struggling with something, you need to reach out and talk to somebody.
True. And also when you're struggling with someone, you have a choice. You have a choice when you're handling those emotions, whether you're going to take that out on somebody else or whether you're going to take that to the Lord and have Him help you deal with it. Because I know there are a lot of times, like for us, being married, infertility can really, it can destroy it has destroyed a lot of marriages. So there were a lot of times when we would have to take a step back and say, okay, I know the only reason I'm actually mad at you right now is because of what we're struggling with, and this is just grief talking. And so we just need to take a step back and realize that we're on the same team. And sometimes you have to do that when you're talking, especially with a close friend or a family member. And when you're grieving or dealing with something, sometimes you have to take that step back and say, okay, I know the real reason I'm upset with them, or the real reason this person is upset with me is because they're dealing with something, whatever it may be. And so you just got to learn to forgive and let those things go and say, all right, let's take a step back. We're on the same team and let's work through this together. So
that's a whole nother struggle in itself.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a good point. Oh, Karen said it's tough on a marriage for sure.
Yes,
yeah,
it is.
It is.
I can imagine. There's so many aspects that y'all are mentioning, and that's probably just the surface level
so
stuff.
Much.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we could go hours more if you want. We'll just keep it rolling. but seriously, there's a lot
all night.
That's right.
There's a lot that goes into it. You're right.
Yeah.
Karen says that losing a baby is tougher because on top of the grief and emotion, you're dealing with the hormones too. She said she was crazy.
That's true.
true.
I
Yeah.
do remember that being a factor in our situation too, for sure.
Oh, good grief. Oh, goodness.
That's true.
Yeah.
Tears of joy.
And ours miscarriage was only 11, 12 weeks. But I mean, if we're getting real with this issue, my aunt actually had a stillbirth where her child didn't make it through all the way, but she still had to deliver the child, which is again called a stillbirth. It's technically not a miscarriage, but it's along the same lines of what we're talking about. So there's a lot of scars. I mean, it's definitely a traumatic event to go through those kind of things, with infertility aside.
Right.
So, and those are the kind of things that I'm telling you, reach out to people. You'd be surprised how many women share that same story. That's probably one of the biggest things, we found out throughout reaching out to other people is they would be like, oh yeah, well, I've had this, or I know someone who's gone through this many. And
Right.
it opens up a world that you didn't know about.
It does, and that's why I do these mental health awareness streams.
Mhm.
Is I've learned to just speak out.
Yep.
We can't, if we keep it to ourselves, as I said earlier, we're not meant to do life alone, and it just builds and builds and overflows in some area, multiple areas of our life, and then it gets out of hand, and you can't pinpoint what the original problem was, and we just need to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And words can literally save somebody's life. As y'all are saying, y'all don't know what people are going through. You don't know what they're coming home from or going home to, or you just don't know. And words are make it or break it for some people. So
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
That's why in church ministry, we encourage, our youth or our members to reach out to us at any time, because that's what we're here for. And sometimes, like we're talking about tonight, that's all it takes is just start that conversation, and then you can work through it and peel back the layers of the onions, if you will, to the root of the problem. So
True.
Good words.
Yeah, man. All right, y'all. That was good stuff. I hope and pray that at least one person was touched from it, if not more. And thank y'all for exposing and being vulnerable, and that's part of it.
Of course.
Absolutely.
But strong and bold and brave enough to speak out about it, because none of us are truly alone in any of this, and we have our faith to go by, and there's some people out there that don't know what that's like, and you guys are living, walking, breathing testimonies of the faith of God. And you're real. Y'all expose your struggles and your pains, and it's not easy to talk about, but that's part of it. Growing pains.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, I'm going to close it here again. Thank you so much. And until, next time.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.